There is a unique nonprofit watchdog group in Washington that has been stirring the political pot for a while now. It's called Judicial Watch. What we know about Hillary Clinton, the allegations of pay for play, the connection with the Clinton Foundation, and the many batches of clandestine emails, as well as the allegations of corruption that have merged into the political discourse, originated mainly from Judicial Watch and its Freedom of Information, or what they call FOIA, requests. In a presentation, Judicial Watch recently tried to put everything into perspective to explain what laws have been broken and why you might want to be concerned. This broadcast will walk you through that panel discussion and highlight some of the more unnerving revelations. And a key revelation has to do with intent, says Chris Farrell, a lead investigator of Judicial Watch. Farrell is a former Army intelligence officer who has prosecuted espionage cases. He believes the American public is being misled.
The American public is being misled, and they're being misled in a very deliberate fashion. So as a special agent of Army counterintelligence, I'm directly personally responsible for stopping 6 Foreign Intelligence Service agents. Those are cases that I ran. I've put people in jail, not just under the American legal system, but even under the German legal system. I've worked with the Attorney General in Baden-Württemberg to put a guy in jail for spying, for espionage. And in particular, I think everyone needs to appreciate that Mrs. Clinton was the subject of a national security crime investigation. This wasn't a security review. It wasn't an argument over classification levels. This was a violation of Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 793F, mishandling national defense information. And contrary to what the American public has been told repeatedly, intent is not an element of the crime. There's no requirement to prove any sort of intent at all. And so when Mr. Comey talks about intent, or he wasn't able to prove it, or there was no sort of specification that showed an intent, it's a red herring. It's a false argument. It isn't a requirement of the crime.
And Farrell says there is little doubt that Mrs. Clinton handled classified top-secret messages while she was Secretary of State.
So we know from the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community that 22 top-secret SCI, which is Sensitive Compartmented Information, it's a special category of intelligence collection. 22 top-secret SCI messages or emails went across Mrs. Clinton's unsecured server. It's a fact. It's a finding of the Inspector General. That's the root of the referral to the Department of Justice that caused them to begin this inquiry. The fact that that has occurred puts the United States at grave risk. That's the definition, really, for compromising top-secret material. That is the issue that is really the focal point of what the FBI should have been looking at. And it's a yes or no question.
While referring to the FBI investigation of Mrs. Clinton's emails, Farrell says that FBI Director James Comey is misleading the American people by saying that Mrs. Clinton is not guilty because she lacked deliberate intent to mishandle classified documents.
It's not what did you intend. It's not how did you feel about it. It's not what were you really trying to accomplish. It's a yes or no question. Did this event occur? Yes or no? And then if it did occur, who is responsible for it? What is the proximate cause of this event occurring? And if you walk it back to find the person who made it happen, that's who's prosecuted. And this whole intent thing is nonsense. Mr. Comey is lying to the American public when he goes down that path. The reason I say that is because there's lots of people sitting in jail for doing just that.
Other irregularities Farrell questions are the fact that Mrs. Clinton was never polygraphed, a standard procedure in security investigations. And Farrell wonders why she was never given her Miranda rights, another irregularity. But finally, Farrell thinks that FBI Director James Comey has been compromised.
That's a very telling moment that it wasn't a rights warning. The larger scale thing, I think also sort of the unintended consequence of all this, my last point I'll wrap on, is that the FBI director, Mr. Comey, is personally compromised. He's complicit in this scandal.
Questions about the conduct of Mrs. Clinton may not be limited to her handling of classified emails. It may in fact include her husband and their Clinton Foundation. It appears that the only way to account for the Clintons' swelling wealth following their White House tenure is through the diversion of funds from the Clinton Foundation, says panelist Jerome Corsi, author of Partners in Crime.
Now, Partners in Crime says we have the evidence. The evidence is the financial statements, the audited financial statements, and it's the 990s, where, for instance, as I point out, Unit Aid, which is a tax structure in Europe that is administered through the United Nations, World Health Organization in Geneva, gives a huge amount of money. It's the biggest program the Clinton Foundation runs, to the Clinton Foundation to get AIDS combated, HIV/AIDS, and largely in Africa and other third world countries. Well, there's no year we could find, when I was doing the research, where what Unit Aid reports they gave to the Clinton Foundation is what the Clinton Foundation reports receiving. Some years it's higher, some years it's lower, but how could this record discrepancy exist? And then the Clintons leave the White House begging that they're desperately poor. Of course, Hillary Clinton has an $8 million book contract from Simon & Schuster. They buy expensive homes in Chappaqua and in Washington. They're obviously not destitute. They're going to have pensions as president. Hillary Clinton is aiming in the Senate, etc. But the Clintons end up with net worths of over $100 million each. And even with the speaking fees, there's no way they could have amassed that kind of wealth on the salaries of Secretary of State or the Senate. The money comes from diverting money out of the Clinton Foundation. In other words, the Clinton Foundation says we got a gross number of receipts this year in revenue through our charity operations, and the gross number of what they spent, but there's no detail. It's almost as if the financials were intentionally set up to perpetrate a scam. And if you do a detailed analysis of the financial statements, you can see millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars being diverted. I'm going to end with the point that Bill Clinton has two private corporations, WJC LLC and WJC Investments. They're filed in Delaware. Now, WJC is Bill Clinton's initials, and these were never fully disclosed. They were found out in the process of other investigations. Now, these two are fundamentally function, especially WJC LLC, as a pass-through shell corporation. That's what money launderers set up. It's a red flag for money laundering, drug cartels, terrorists, and the Clinton Foundation doesn't give detail as to what monies go into WJC. And we increasingly find WJC, these organizations, mentioned and noticed in the Panama Papers, which are a set of documents that were released out of Panama showing offshore transactions. And as I proceed in the investigation, what happens is earthquake happens in Haiti. Clintons rush in, opportunity to have hundreds of millions of dollars flow through their hands, and in the process divert the money in a money laundering operation that appears to involve even now John Podesta, the Russians, and other entities we don't know about fully.
Pass-through shell corporations, financial transactions showing up in the Panama Papers, and allegations of money laundering would seem to provide fodder for the FBI's investigation of Mrs. Clinton, or maybe the Clinton Foundation. Yet the FBI's investigation, led by Director James Comey, was cursory at best, and Director Comey's conduct disgraceful, says former federal prosecutor Joseph DeGeneva.
After looking at the entire record that he has made public, and it is not the entire record, it is very clear that from the moment he took control of this investigation, he decided that he was not going to recommend the prosecution of the first female nominee of a major party for President of the United States. The FBI director made a political decision. He did not make a law enforcement decision. And every step that he took in conducting this investigation, quote unquote, which it was not, shows you categorically that it was not a legitimate investigation. And I say that with sadness. You recounted the number of federal offices that I've held that involve investigation. I consider, James Comey said that no reasonable prosecutor would bring the case that they had come up with based on the facts. That is utter nonsense. His news conference, and it wasn't a news conference because he didn't answer any questions, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and call it his news, where he explained not all, but most of the details of her transgressions, and then concluded, to the amazement of most of the FBI agents in that building and almost all of the former FBI agents in the United States, that there was no crime because there was no intent, was absolutely ludicrous. Now, it is evident to me that what Mr. Comey should have done at the beginning of this investigation was impanel a grand jury. He did not do that. When you want to investigate crimes involving national security information, classified information, you don't do interviews. You issue subpoenas to witnesses, third parties for documents. You make people come into court and fight them in front of a federal judge, and you worry about attorney-client privilege and all that, and you work that out. Director Comey didn't do that. Now, why did he not do that? He didn't do it because he didn't want to investigate it. He wanted to conclude this investigation before the election. And the only thing he could do to conclude it was to find that she did not commit a crime, Mrs. Clinton. That conclusion, again, by anyone who's looked at this evidence, who's a reasonable prosecutor, is absolutely ludicrous. There were multiple crimes here committed by her. There were certainly crimes committed by lawyers involved in the case, by employees of the Clinton apparatus, the destruction of evidence, the manner in which witnesses were handled. One lawyer representing 3 or 4 witnesses. The Justice Department never permits that, but Comey and the Attorney General allowed it. Deletion of emails after they were subpoenaed by Congress. Destruction of evidence by lawyers, which Mr. Comey says he found no criminal intent in that. I must say, after watching Director Comey testify and give his news conference, one has the sense of a Russian village. This is like a Potemkin village. This was a fake investigation. There are now two systems of justice for people with classified information clearances. The big shots get a pass, the little people go to prison.
The FBI should have prosecuted multiple crimes, says DeGeneva, but at least there was an investigation. There was no investigation of a dubious deal for the sale of a uranium mine in Kazakhstan, brokered under the auspices of the Clinton Foundation, says Peter Schweitzer, author of the best-selling book Clinton Cash.
But to your point precisely, you're exactly right. This was a global enterprise. So you had individuals like Frank Giustra, who has mining interests around the world. And here's the thing that we know about, trying to develop mining assets around the world. It's all about relationships with third world governments. So if you want to get a mining concession in, say, Kazakhstan or in the Congo, that concession is granted by the government there. Unlike the United States, where you have private entities that own mines, it is a government operation. If you are somebody like Frank Giustra who wants to get lucrative mining concessions around the world, who better to have a relationship with than America's chief diplomat, who's providing foreign assistance, who's providing, the kinds of aid or other policy prescriptions that are so important to third world elites. So you had a situation like the one in Kazakhstan where the timing is just overwhelming. Bill Clinton flies over with Frank Giustra, who's been trying to get a uranium concession in Kazakhstan, has not been able to get it. Bill Clinton shows up, has a press conference, says wonderful things about the dictator of Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev, saying what a great human rights record he has, which is laughable, makes human rights groups go apoplectic. And 3 weeks after that, well, first of all, Frank Giustra, 2 days later, gets the uranium concession in Kazakhstan. Then 3 weeks later, the Clinton Foundation gets $30 million from Frank Giustra. And then you have the pattern move forward because this entity, which becomes Uranium One, has this lucrative asset in Kazakhstan. It starts buying up uranium assets in the United States. And what happens in 2009 is the Russians come calling. Specifically ARMS, which is an entity wholly owned by Rosatom, the Russian State Atomic Nuclear Agency. So to be clear, Vladimir Putin's Russia wants to buy uranium assets in the United States and these lucrative assets in Kazakhstan That's great, but it requires approval from the federal government, specifically 9 government agencies that have to sign off on this deal, including Hillary Clinton's State Department. So she's unique in that of all the other agencies that are reviewing this, including the Pentagon, including the Treasury Department, only one has a record of opposing precisely these kinds of deals. That's Hillary Clinton. But the second factor that's critical is of all the government agencies that are reviewing this and agree to this process, only one agency is headed by somebody whose private foundation collects $145 million from shareholders in that deal. Now, to me, that enough warrants investigation. I mean, imagine, take the Clintons out of it. Imagine a Secretary of Defense is making a national security decision similar to this, and their private foundation takes $145 million from foreign businessmen. I mean, you can bet everybody would be investigating.
No investigation. That bothers Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton, who worries that Clinton's actions may have compromised the trust Americans have in their government.
Just quickly, just outside the criminal aspect of this and whether Hillary Clinton should go to jail or be prosecuted, there's this fundamental issue about government transparency that's been put at risk as a result of this Clinton scandal. And we don't understand, I think we take for granted how open and transparent our government is, relatively speaking, to every other government in the world. No other country allows access to the courts to groups like Judicial Watch the way the United States does to force the government to turn over records. And that whole process is contingent on good faith on the part of the government. And we're not naive about that. But generally speaking, when the government says, we looked for the records, and these are the records, we can't go in and necessarily second guess every time they say they've looked and say, hey, you should look here, there, and everywhere. We have to rely on the government doing the job they've been entrusted to do with by the American people. Hillary Clinton tore that compact up because now we can't trust anything the government says, at least the State Department says, because they promised us. And they promised the courts they looked everywhere they should have for records. And Mrs. Clinton, if she gets away, or there's no accountability, whether she gets away personally is not the issue, if there's no institutional accountability for the misconduct that Mrs. Clinton did as Secretary of State and the agency did, FOIA may end, practically speaking, because you can't rely on the law being enforced, or because the government officials may say, I have a way of getting around these darn taxpayers who want to find out what I'm up to because I can text privately or come up with another, whatever the innovation is technically or on social media or elsewhere, to do my business, the people's business, in secret.
Well, that's why this point that was made about the civil service is so important. Because when they first responded to the Freedom of Information Act request, are they suggesting when they didn't find any Hillary Clinton emails that didn't raise a red flag right away in the first series of responses? This is beyond belief that no one said, where the hell are Hillary's emails? It is precisely why what Comey said at his news conference and in testimony is so offensive to people who believe in good government and accountability. I mean, what he has done is he has undermined confidence in the ability of the government to investigate itself.
Joe, let me tell you that in court hearings where we've been in front of Judge Emmett Sullivan in one of the principal FOIA cases, he got very frustrated at one point and turned to the government attorney representing the State Department and said, I want one question answered. It should be very clear. Who authorized use of the server? It's a basic interrogative. And in this case, the dissembling, the double talk, the staring at one's shoes, it made Judge Sullivan really come out of his seat at this point because it's so fundamentally simple. Who authorized this?
We have questions pending. Wait 1 second, Jerry. We have questions pending, so you know, with Mrs. Clinton. We had sought her deposition testimony, which would have required her to come in and be questioned directly. The judge didn't bite on that, but did authorize us to give her questions in writing, which we did 25 questions, which are simple and available and to the public online.
And the answers will be written by the same lawyers who deleted the emails after they were subpoenaed.
Right. Well, and those answers are due October 13th. So either way, there's going to be further accountability.
Well, we'll have under oath, and the FBI didn't even do that.
Yeah, that's,
I want to
Jerry,
make
go
the point.
ahead.
Remember, the other negligent group in this is clearly the mainstream media and the fourth estate, the press. I mean, if we take a look at, remember, we learned about this private email server through Guccifer, through a hacker who first released emails, and it was clear that these were not in the State Department email system, and that there were addresses that Clinton email, and everyone saying, well, what is this? That's how we found out about this. Didn't come from a civil servant, it didn't come from the mainstream media, it came from a hacker.
Right.
And in fact, we've gotten, the two ways we've gotten information on the Clinton emails, and including on the Clinton Foundation, have been from people like Julian Assange and Judicial Watch, not from the Department of Justice.
We do it the legal way, just to be clear.
Well, you do it the legal way, and I'm not trying to
let's
justify what Julian Assange or anyone else is doing in hacking. But my point is that when you have to get down to a hacker who is going to tell the truth, the criminal breaking into the system is telling the truth, where those responsible for making sure the system is legitimate.
Well,
FBI, civil service, law enforcement are not doing their jobs. This is where Judicial Watch and others have come in, and Judicial Watch especially with the FOIA requests, to demand and continuing to demand that emails that, those weren't destroyed, we just found them. Well, how do you find 14,000 emails?
It's corruption. It's just corruption.
Just quickly, Peter, before I go to you, Jason Leopold of Vice News, to his credit, he had the main case that resulted in the 55,000
Yes.
and may result in more emails coming out before the election now. Jason had participated in a previous Judicial Watch panel, which is also available online. He made the point, Hillary Clinton was an important person, and he was just doing what he thought all reporters do.
Right.
Well, this is an important person, is probably going to run for higher office in the presidency, so give me her emails. And he didn't know what he was getting into when he thought he was just doing regular reporting work, and indeed he was, but he was the only reporter and the first to go to court about the records and got them as a result. And it just shows you just how little effort it takes in the end to get the accountability.
And apropos of what Jerry has said about the mainstream media, how many FOIA requests have been filed by the New York Times and the Washington Post? How many? They're nothing. I mean, they are absent. Talk about AWOL. Well, Bob Woodward talks about, we have 27 reporters working on Donald Trump. Great, give me 27 on the emails, and let's find out where they are and what happened to them. And have you interviewed all these guys who were part of this process? I mean, the notion that the mainstream media serves a useful function under the First Amendment is really under attack.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. And if you want to follow up on the new Clinton emails that are going to be released over the next several weeks, go to our website at judicialwatch.org. And of course, they'll be coming out after the election as well. So no matter what happens, we'll be on the case. Thank you for all of you joining us, and hopefully we'll have a panel like this soon again. So stay tuned, but you can track us on the web at judicialwatch.org, and of course we're on Facebook and Twitter as well. And you can learn more about all the panelists on our website as well, and find out more about them and figure out how to get their books and other information. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great week.
Just how did the Clintons come to have a net worth in the hundreds of millions of dollars? Why would a Clinton shell corporation wind up in the Panama Papers? Did Mrs. Clinton destroy emails? Did she mishandle classified documents? Did the FBI perform a cover-up investigation? Did the Clinton Foundation solicit contributions with a wink and a nod in exchange for access to the Secretary of State? Is Clinton corruption real? Judicial Watch has presented a lot of information to help answer some of these questions. In the end, though, a clue may be contained in the Hollywood blockbuster All the President's Men about the Watergate scandal. In the movie, the FBI informer who was guiding the investigators would tell them to follow the money. A generation later, that may be the best way to answer so many questions about the Clintons. Just follow the money. John Hines, One America News, Washington.